All right, gang, we got Andy Frank here first. As always, raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll call on you. Let's start with Tyler Donahue, 247.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, Andy. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Congrats on getting those 26 guys on board. I wanted to ask about one of them in particular, Beckham Kritza, your quarterback signee. James Franklin acknowledged during the broadcast that it was a journey for him in high school with the transfers and some of the movement. I know he maybe didn't get to accrue as much film as we're used to with quarterbacks. So, what were some of the challenges with getting to this point with Beckham, and ultimately, what's the intrigue about him? Because you guys have seen as much of him as anyone at this point, and many have not seen a whole lot of sample size.
Yeah, obviously he's a tall kid that can sling it. I think he's a guy that is going to keep developing as a quarterback. He's able to kind of throw the ball from all different angles. He's not the elite athlete by any stretch in terms of a runner, but what he is really good at is in the pocket, having a good feel for things, kind of making his way around, escaping, pressure, and still keeping his eyes downfield to make plays with his arm. Obviously, we had him in camp. We liked him in camp. Um, he had really good film as a junior. You turn on his film as a junior, and you turn on like the all throws, every throw he makes. The balls that hit the ground very often, and I think those were some of the things that we were really impressed with, and why we were excited about him.
Let's go to Seth Engel and then Mark Brennan. You're on deck.
Hey Andy, thanks for the time today. James talked on the live stream about NIL and how it's obviously a factor in recruiting. From your standpoint, where do you think Penn State is in that regard, and how does this impending house settlement kind of change the way that you can maybe discuss NIL with some of these recruits?
Yeah, obviously, I think we're all trying to feel out the landscape and try and, figure out how to advance in the new world of college football that involves NIL and compensation for the players. It's, I think, something that we've made a lot of progress, still a lot of progress to be made, obviously. I think that's going to be the case, going forward for us and really for everybody else. In terms of, the process, we still try to start with the foundation of the things we always have in terms of why you pick a school. You're picking it to get developed as a football player, to have a great college experience, the education piece, being around like-minded people in terms of just, trying to succeed in life. We've found that the people that have interest in a lot of things and want to be successful in anything that they do, those are the kids that in families that we tend to have the most success with. Now, the money is now another piece of that. If it's the only thing that a family or a kid is looking at, we're probably not going to be the place for them. But we also want to make sure that if we are the right place for them, for all the reasons that Penn State has always been, a great choice for kids, we want to make sure that we're competitive and we're not asking kids to take, less money to come play football here versus potentially going somewhere else.
Let's go to Mark Brennan and then Max Ralph. You're on deck.
Andy, I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, the recruitment of LeVar Jr., can you take us through that? I mean, so many people are focused on his dad, but tell us about him as a player and how that process kind of worked out for you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because obviously everybody's going to think about the connection to dad, and obviously his dad had a great career here and he had a great career in the NFL. But when we're evaluating, LeVar, we're trying to look at, who he is as a player and, who he can be. I think he's a guy that, has continually gotten better throughout his career. If you were to rewind a couple of years, I don't know if, the world would have said, hey, he's a Penn State level player a couple of years ago. But if you look from year to year to year, he just keeps getting better and better. And you saw it this senior year, he really flashed on film. It was a guy that, we're super excited about. I think he's got, the ability to, rush off the edge. I think he can play standing up a little bit as well. He's got some twitch. He's got some bend. I think he's a guy that, has got a lot of versatility and is going to be a really good player for us down the road.
Let's go to Max Ralph and then Greg Pickle. You're on deck.
Hey, Andy, thanks for the time. With the elimination of the NLI now and kind of changing the way the paperwork goes and everything. What has that process been like for you guys in dealing with that change? And what does the next week plus the next couple months look like still?
Yeah, so the change in terms of removing the letter of intent ultimately probably didn't make too much difference, just in the sense that the conferences have essentially created their version of the letter of intent. So when the players sign today, they're signing a Big Ten conference agreement with us. And that basically is stipulated they're not going to be recruited by anybody else throughout the country. So, in terms of how the former letter of intent worked in terms of, preventing other schools from recruiting the players that we sign or somebody else signs, that really kind of stays the same. I think what has changed a little bit is, obviously the NIL component and then the future revenue sharing that we anticipate coming with the House settlement if it's, ultimately approved. So it adds a couple different layers there. But the letter of intent piece ultimately is probably not a dramatic change. It just kind of brings it in-house to the conference as opposed to having an outside organization.
Go to Greg Pickle, followed by Ryan Snyder.
Andy, excuse me, you guys were one of the many schools who ramped up your interest in Chaz Coleman in the month of September, got him on campus, and then obviously were able to land his commitment and keep it. What was his recruitment like at the start when you guys really started pushing for him? And then also down the stretch as we got close to signing day?
Yeah, really interesting recruitment. Typically, most of the guys that we sign in a class, we've been recruiting for several years heavily. And it wasn't like Chaz was completely unknown. He was a guy that was known, but wasn't someone that we were, actively recruiting nearly the same as we did kind of down the stretch. His senior film started coming out, and it popped pretty quick. And I think you saw that across the country. He started, as soon as that film got out there, he started picking up a ton of offers. We were fortunate to be one of the ones that kind of got in there fairly early on in that stretch. In terms, I say fairly early on, that first week, as it picked up there, and because of our proximity, because of the tradition we have here, and I think the type of family he's from, it made a lot of sense. I think our staff really connected well with him and his family. The recruiting staff, I think, run a point to start off there with him and the family, and then Coach Franklin and others, obviously, tied to him. Very versatile athlete. You pull up his clips and he's playing quarterback and throwing some pretty good balls as a quarterback. But he's, playing off the edge. He's, catching passes. He's kind of doing a little bit of everything. And everything he does, he's got a twitch. He's got kind of an ability to burst and ability to sink his hips. I think those are things that are going to serve him really well here, and we're really, really excited to have him.
Go to Ryan Snyder, followed by Tyler Donahue.
Thanks, Andy. Pros and cons of having a December signing period still. Just kind of curious on your thoughts on that. And is there any momentum maybe in coaching circles to get that early signing period moved to the summer that was talked about a lot and then kind of died off?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm, seeing momentum right now. I think that there was at one point, and I could see that circling back. I think sometimes what ends up happening for us in college football is it's kind of almost talking season, if you will, where you're kind of contemplating different things. We get in the football season, we start worrying about, what's right in front of us. So I could see that popping back up. I think there's pros and cons. And, we've had the December signing period for a while. We obviously this year we moved it up a couple of weeks. As hectic as this week is and was in terms of us being, in the Big Ten championship game, I do think there are some advantages to it because now we can kind of be set. And we can kind of move forward into, next year in terms of recruiting and kind of know what our roster is going to look like in the incoming, freshman category. So I think that's something that's been positive. I also think that, as we move forward, the real thing that's changed maybe as much as anything that every kind of latches on the signing date, but we've changed from a contact period here in December to a quiet period. So instead of our coaches hitting the road these next coming weeks, we'll still be on campus here. I think that's going to be a very positive change. I'm definitely in favor of that. I just think the more we can spend on our campuses with our players, with the coaches, I think the better we'll be. I think also this is one of the craziest times of the year. I think Long term in college football, we would love to see, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of probably changes along the way. But I don't think anybody really thinks it's good to have transfer portal, signing day, all of these things going on essentially while the playoffs are going to be going on. If you look at Major League Sports, whether it's football, basketball, whatever it may be, you would never see that where, whatever you want to call it, free agency, you can make up whatever name you want for it, but all of that happening during your playoffs, that's probably not good for the sport. And hopefully at some point we can move forward there and make some changes, but it'll have to be pretty significant, have to kind of fit a bigger picture. I think sometimes maybe we make, one small change here, think it's going to solve everything. Now these pieces they fit more together, and you have to kind of fit the whole year around each other.
Let's go to Tyler Donahue, followed by Audrey Snyder.
Andy, those running backs you brought in from opposite ends of the state, and Tyke and Jabri, could you speak individually on each of those guys in terms of what their skill set is, and ultimately maybe how they're complementary as a running back class together?
Yeah, obviously we've had a ton of success with in-state running backs. So that was an important piece for us was getting the best players in the state to be here, particularly at that position. I think we've been really, really good. I think both of these guys are going to have great careers here. I guess I'll start out west with Tyke. Obviously was committed to us for a long time. Is a guy that early on in his career was a fairly highly rated guy. Continued to get better. He's the guy that I think he's got a good feel for the game. He can change direction quickly. He can stop. He can start. Is he necessarily the fastest guy on the field? He may not be for us the fastest guy on the field, but he's got enough speed to hit some bigger runs. But I think what he really does well is change his direction. He finds creases. He can lower his shoulder. And I think he's going to be a guy that's going to allow us to continue a traditional path in the backfield. In terms of Jabri, I wouldn't say that they're dramatically different players. Jabri is probably maybe the feel and kind of the space. He kind of got a real good sense of how to make his way through tight spaces. Kind of maybe I'd say Tyke maybe a little bit more stop start, where Jabri may be a little bit smoother and niftier at times. I think both of those things. I think sometimes we get caught up with there's only one way to be successful at a position, and it really in most positions there's multiple ways to be highly successful. I think those guys have the main things you need to have to be successful at running backs. They both kind of do it slightly different. Right, you're muted.
Go ahead, Audrey.
My turn. Hey, Andy, appreciate your time. What are kind of your impressions of the wide receivers in this class? And is there anybody in that group that you think maybe has some instant impact potential?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously we feel like we got a group of really good players that are going to have good careers here. I always hesitate to put that on somebody that hey they're going to come in and they're going to play right away as a freshman. I think they will obviously give them that opportunity, but time will tell. We'll get them here. Sometimes guys will separate themselves. It takes a lot. I mean, you have to physically be there, and I think that's the thing that people start with and kind of think about initially. But you got to learn the playbook. You got to playing wide receiver in college is very, very different than playing wide receiver in high school. And so a lot of those other things kind of come into it. You got to adjust to being in college. You're playing against different level of players, whether it's at the wide receiver position that you're competing against, but then also the DBs. So I don't necessarily want to say, hey, this is the guy that I'm going to say, hey, put a star on. He's going to, be the guy as a freshman. I think all of them have a chance to be really good players for us, and hopefully for all of our sakes that we can find somebody in that group, or maybe multiples that kind of help us this coming year.
Go to Mark Brennan, followed by Mark Wogenrich.
Andy, there's kind of a natural connection with LeVar Jr., but with Darius Dixon, could you take us through how that played out? And I know you have Venga's on the team now, but do you see the West Coast being even more of a viable opportunity with the expansion of the Big Ten?
Yeah, I'll start kind of with the West Coast question. I think that it's interesting because the landscape of college recruiting is always shifting and always moving. And in a lot of ways, the world has gotten smaller. There's obviously more access to information. And so people from all over the place can see Penn State, not just on TV on Saturdays, but on their phone when they're searching through, social media. Those type of connections I think matter sometimes as well in terms of just visibility. Now that we've got a West Coast presence conference wise, people on the West Coast are going to see us even more. But at the same time, I would also say there's probably some dynamics that are shrinking and making people want to maybe recruit more close to home. The financial piece of things, I think, sometimes plays a factor. The ability to recruit somebody that's far away and you don't see them nearly as often. It's hard for someone who's in California to come to campus. So it's got to be the right player from the right family who is either very capable to get here on a regular basis, or doesn't crave the need to take visits all the time. It is good with the phone conversations and the FaceTimes and those type of things. So long, in the short, probably what I would say is, yes, I think you will probably see us pop up in a variety of different places that maybe we haven't always popped up in, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to, transition. I think we're still going to focus, on the state of Pennsylvania, on this region, and you'll see most of our players coming from that footprint, but you will see some here and there from all different places. In terms of Darius and his family, I think Alan Zamitis on our recruiting staff and Terry Smith, our corners coach, did a really, really good job with him and his family. I think AZ was on it early and made that connection and had a really good relationship. As a guy who played corner here, and obviously knows the game and was able to talk football with Darius and his folks, and just kind of why this place is going to be hopefully the best place for him to play college football. I think that went a long way in terms of his recruitment.
We got time for a couple more. Let's go Mark Wogenrich, followed by Ryan Snyder.
Hey, Andy, thanks. Appreciate it. James has mentioned bringing in somebody with like NFL contract experience, money experience, accounting experience at that level with rev sharing coming. What kind of person do you want to work with? What's that job going to be like for you to work with? And what would a job description look like there?
Yeah, I think that we will, move forward in that regard here over the course of the next, several months. I don't know when that'll exactly take place. But yeah, I think we are interested in someone who can have relationships with agents, that can, know how to deal with contracts, to know how to deal with the negotiations. If you look at NFL organizations, typically they've got 1 to 3 or 4 people in the salary cap world. Those folks will help with those negotiations. Typically you try to center it with one person or a small group that handle those conversations. Obviously, coach, myself, the whole staff will be involved in the value that we place in terms of how do we allocate the resources. But I think having someone who has some familiarity with contracts, with talking to agents, I think sometimes you got to be careful not to think that it's an adversarial relationship. It's really not. At the end of the day, the agent and the player are looking to find the best situation for themselves. Like we talked about earlier, we're really big on it being the full picture of why you pick a college. And now in today's age, money should be a part of it. That there's nothing wrong with that. So just trying to figure out, hey, how do we have those conversations to understand what's important to the family through the agent in a lot of cases, and being able to have that back and forth where it's not at all confrontational. It's just more, hey, how do both sides make this work and make it ultimately you want it to be a scenario where both sides feel like they're getting a great deal. I think sometimes you see some contracts, and I think most NFL teams try not to operate this way, but you'll see it sometimes where you'll get some deals where it's like, hey, the team got a great deal and the player got a bad deal. Or you might get the vice versa scenario. The player got a great deal and the team got a bad deal. I think long term, those type of relationships don't end up the way you want them to be. So you want to try and find a way to have it be kind of fit for both sides. I think, ultimately having a structure for us where we've got one or potentially even more, people that are kind of helping in that regard. We have an NIL crew right now that is helping serve in that role, but I think we will, try and advance into having, someone who's got some experience with, dealing with the agents and dealing with the contracts. I think that will help our overall organization.
Last question, Ryan Snyder.
Thanks, guys. Andy, the stretch run felt busier than normal, especially for you guys this year. Did expanded scholarships impact that, either with you guys or nationally? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It just felt like we were seeing more flips, more activity down the stretch, or maybe it was the moved up signing day. Just kind of curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I don't know if I would pinpoint one thing. I think the couple things that jump to my mind, the moved up signing day, I think probably plays a part. Because you didn't have things kind of settle down after the season. It was kind of almost in the middle of the season, if you will. I think the other thing, that jumps to my mind is obviously the money piece that's involved now. You're more likely to, if there's people out there that are trying to flip a kid, depending on how significant the money difference is, someone that doesn't have the foundation of the relationship, and have, a year, 2 years built up, may still be able to come into the equation if they have, significantly more money. So I think you see a little bit of that. So, I think that a lot of things kind of come together to make it maybe busier. To your point about the bigger, scholarship numbers, moving forward, if the House settlement passes, yeah, that probably plays a part too, just because now there's larger numbers that are potentially going to different places, especially after probably a few years where the transfer portal may have, kind of slowed some people down in the high school ranks. It didn't really slow us down in the high school ranks. We always wanted to kind of build the foundation there. And so we were always going to have bigger numbers. But I would say that for us, we're signing more guys because there is a little bit more flexibility in terms of your total scholarship number.
Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, Andy. We'll have Alan Zamitis next year, guys. I'm going to shut